So, this is the upteenth time I have tried to record this. And I even went so far as to try to loosely script something, but sometimes you just need to talk. And I realize that right now, with the way how everything is in the world, this is the time to talk just about anything. About anything. And it's been a while, and I I I feel like being myself a self-perceived outsider to everything, that now is the time that I have a responsibility to say something about whatever is going on right now. And I am so taken aback by everything. I know the one thing that I want to say is that we live in a culture of fear, and I know that. And that everyone feels excluded in some way. Everyone feels some kind of disenfranchisement somehow. And that we're told to scrutinize society and see the divides and acknowledge everyone as other. And it's sickening to me. I have been an outsider my entire life. I was made fun of in school for being the only Filipino kid there, and being kind of overweight. I was called a Chinese coconut, and I didn't even understand what that meant. Like, I had no idea what the sense of like racism is. 'Cause growing up in South Florida, I thought that I wasn't so different from all the people that I saw around me. But my family had such a rocky relation to itself that um, people didn't have a lot of time to talk to me growing up as a child in my own home because everyone was too busy fighting each other. So I didn't really have so much an ability to even speak English. I spoke a third Tagalog, a third English, and a third gibberish. And I had to teach myself English. I loved when we would read in class because it sounded so beautiful, the words that would come out, and knowing how to spell all of them, and hearing the beauty of language. Of course, I couldn't put it as poetically as I do now at the age of like 6 or 7 or whatever, but it gave me an appreciation for being able to talk and be heard. Now, I've always had that appreciation. Uh, but because of that fact that I felt so different, first for not being able to talk to anyone, second for, being the kid that everyone made fun of because I was so different. Because I went to, a nice ish school in South Florida, just with how the school districts, or how everything was locally organized. So I ended up going to whatever school by default. But I felt very much like an outsider all the time. And, my parents didn't have it easy. both my parents are from the Philippines. They met in Amsterdam, but they're both from the Philippines. My mom was in college and my dad was in the Air Force when they met. But before that, my dad had uh, grown up between the Philippines and America. His older brother, my uncle, uh, him, his kids, and my father, who there's a big difference in their age. Uh, they were all moved to America by my uncle to try to give them a better opportunity at some success at life than they would have in the Philippines. Uh, my uncle had helped, of course, his own family and his kids uh, in sending them to college to become engineers, lawyers, and doctors and whatnot, all that stuff. Um, but gave nothing to my father. So in lieu of that, he wanted to give him the inheritance to my family's property in the Philippines. But eventually, my cousins would fight tooth and nail to take that inheritance back. So uh, we never saw any of that. And um, my father, he he did what he could. You know, he worked after the military. He worked as an architect and worked uh, as a professor and all those things. But he always had kind of a rough time because it was tough for all of us, and uh, he never really got on well with just this whole idea of trying to survive, and the fact that, you know, college certifications and all that stuff, all the paper that you're required to have to move forward in life. And you know, my mom, she has a good academic knowledge of English, but she couldn't master idiomatic expressions, and both my parents had just the roughest time trying to adjust to, you know, the socioeconomic standards of the industrial machine of you know, the American workplace, and it just never worked out for us. And we all always felt like outsiders. My sister, I mean, she's fairly successful in herself at this point, but uh, she also had to deal with her own medical conditions and, like, you know, the horrifying uh, case of eczema, far beyond like the normal examples of what that can be. Whatnot, waking up in the middle of the night covered in blood from scratching and whatnot. But my family has always had the rough of it. I've always felt like the outsider. And eventually I would end up getting into all kinds of my own trouble. I was expelled in middle school, and going into high school, everything was rough because I was one of the weird kids. I mean, you know, of course, all my friends were the skater punks, anime nerds, the goth kids, all of them. And I remember the 90s and the aughts. And in that time, the cultural zeitgeist amongst the younger generations was one of apathy and exclusion. And you know, there's a whole generation that embodies that sense of otherness and outsider. And during that entire time, marketing was also promoting the opposite. Media and advertisement all revolved around these ideas of image and sexuality and success, and this idea of the in crowd and what it meant to be someone, and that so much of it was predicated on some kind of material existence of some kind, that if you didn't buy into certain circles, whatnot, with clothing that showed where in the social strata you were, or just trendiness and all that in crowd nonsense. If you weren't part of that, you were not worthwhile for the social world. That was crammed down our throats for the better part of 20 years. And I've always been outside of that sort of sphere, and at some point I'd end up with really being on the outside of all of that, and ending up with my own troubles with substance abuse and homelessness, and going out of high school and trying my hand at college was rough. So I remember at some point, both my father and my mother leave the picture for their own reasons, and I end up being evicted and having to sell off all my family's property because no one's left to be able to do anything with any of it. It's just me and my little dog. And I end up moving in with a friend of mine. And there was one night where we're going bar hopping, and we decide to pick up some of our friends and go get our own case of beer. And we're speeding down the road, and there's beer cans and liquor bottles all over the floor of the car, and we're going a little too fast down a road that probably shouldn't have been on in the first place, and the cops stop us, and I end up getting arrested because there's a warrant out for me for some failure to appear for a court hearing about a theft that I had performed, like shoplifting, months prior. So I end up going to jail, and then by the time I get out, I find that I have nowhere to go. So I end up going to rehab and then floating from halfway house to halfway house, and then come to find out that 5 of my good friends end up dying in the span of 3 months, and I decide I can't live like this. So I moved to Washington and, get a job in construction, then at a metal fabrication shop, then doing utilities, and here I am now finding some stability in my life, and then the rest of the world decides to do the complete opposite, and it falls apart. And now we live in a culture of fear. And everyone is terrified of being the other, of being excluded, of being branded as some kind of heretic to the cultural consciousness of the times, the zeitgeist, the promoted thought of the media. And this whole sense of apathy and exclusion that sense of disenfranchisement that we seem to have all grown up with, we're all finally at the point now where our voices are starting to be heard because we're the generation that's coming up. And finally, we have voices now. Finally, someone's going to pay attention to us. Finally, we're people now. And we're all overcorrecting. As we all have been ignored for so long, and we felt so hurt by the invalidation of our person, being told that we're not enough, even by marketing and advertising standards of the last 20, 30 years, we've been told we're not enough. And we hate it so much. And for once, now that we're finally on the world stage and we're able to be heard, we are trying to scream as loud as we can about that, trying to say exactly who we are and what it is that the world has been ignoring for so long when it comes to the pain of those who are part of it, who've gone unseen for so long. Because it's in that sense of apathy, exclusion, and disenfranchisement that we came to know our own powerlessness. And now that we're finally able to be heard, we find that there is some small iota of a sense of power in the voice, that finally, for once, the world is relenting in its want to be unmovable. But it's in that power that things have gone mad. As we're so afraid now of losing that voice, of returning to shadow and being unheard again. It is something that we all fear, to disappear quietly into the night. So now we grasp at the power. We try so hard to no longer feel like the outsider, but the players within. Because it's a culture of fear. And that fear is that loss of power, that loss of enfranchisement, that loss of the voice. And that is a dangerous place to be in. It seems that in that fear of that loss of the voice that is now heard, we try to scream and shout so that our voices are the loudest. We live in a culture of fear, where now they speak of the redistribution of power. We talk about senses of privilege and worth and enfranchisement and inclusion and the value of persons. But in a culture of fear, where it sickens us to lose the power that we have gained, why are we so willing to take that from everyone else? A culture of fear seems to give way to a culture of vengeance. A culture of vengeance comes from being powerless for so long and having the power now to do something against it. A culture of vengeance begets a culture of violence. I've been an outsider for so long, and I know that one of the things that I value most is being able to have my voice heard. And I know the value in having my voice heard is being able to finally stand up and being able to say where others are wrong and seeing and speaking on what we see is happening around us. But no one's omniscient, no one's omnipotent, no one holds the fullness of truth by their own will alone. So I want to have a conversation and I want to know where I'm wrong. But I can't do that by not listening. How is it that I can celebrate being given a voice without respecting the voices of others, even if I don't agree with them? Even if those voices are dangerous, even if those voices are a threat to myself. I want to hear what all of you have to say. I want to hear the dangerous thoughts and the dangerous voices that would oppose every fiber of my being. Because maybe I'm wrong about everything that I think and everything that I know. But what's the point of having my voice heard if it's the only voice I hear? I don't want to live in a culture of fear. I don't want to live in a culture of vengeance. I don't want to live in a culture of violence. Because that's been my entire life. It shames me to think that finally I find some peace in my own life and the world loses any semblance of peace it ever had. So tell me, where do we go from here? Tell me what the discussion is. Tell me what we're thinking, what we're feeling. Tell me where the world is going. So I'll keep talking if you do. Even if you disagree with me, or I disagree with you, I need to hear what you think. Because otherwise, what's the point in the voices that we have? I think that's all I have to say. I'm gonna keep recording these. No one might reply. It's possible that no one cares. But it's worth hearing, whatever it is that you have to say. If we stay silent in this world, either someone else is going to say what we were going to say, or our thoughts and dreams will die, and eventually everything that could go wrong when our voices are silenced will go wrong, and our thoughts and dreams will live again in someone else's voice. So we might as well say what we have to say now. And let's explore what all this really is together. Thanks for listening. Kind of an ugly ramble, but I needed to say something for once. Till next time. And remember, internet rule number 1, if you record it, no matter how cringe, you post it.